Hey guys, um, I'm going to be running the semester one exam study help for you guys. Reason why I decided to choose this one was because I've been getting a lot of emails about the last couple quizzes in my first semester economics class, as well as the final exam as well. What I've noticed is that a lot of people have been having some issues making sure that they're getting ready for it. If you've taken other classes like the government course or any of the current world issues, the way it's set up is a little bit different. There's a lot more quizzes in this class than there is in others. And I think it kind of helps with the setup. So um, my name is Cody Britton. I'll be running this guys for you, and we'll see if we get some people to pop in here. Quick housekeeping. Um, this will apply if we get some people to join in. A lot of times I just have you guys auto join or auto mute when you come in. So you have to unmute yourself when you want to talk, or you can send me a chat message. Totally up to you. When I do go through these, some of the big things that I'm looking for is lots of questions, right? The idea of using these live sessions really kind of, I think, helps students kind of get to where they need to be when it comes to preparing for quizzes and tests, making sure that they're in the right spot. If they're missing any information, making sure things are clear, because I think sometimes when you are learning in an online environment like we are now, it gets a little bit tough. When we do go through these, just kind of be patient. Sometimes I'll cover things that you might have a question about, or just kind of, wait for a good time to pop in and try and kind of get those clarifying answers that you might need. Never feel like there is too dumb of a question to ask. There never is. As long as it's helping you, you're in a good place. If we have other people join in, just be cool to your classmates, and hopefully, above all else, you learn something. Oop, I skipped one. So for today, we're going to talk a little bit about just a brief introduction to the course itself and kind of what I'm looking for as I go through. I want to talk to you a little bit about preparing for quizzes. I want to tell you a little bit about how I grade when I do grade through this. And I think it'd be really cool if we get to spend a little bit more time on some of the econ tests. I am providing some questions actually for you to kind of look over so you can see format and the kind of things that will be asked of you once you do get to the final. And then if we have more people pop in, we'll be able to make sure that we, I guess, clarify anything that they might need. This one might move pretty quick if we don't have anyone join, but as always, when you're clicking through this, you can always pause it, or you can slow down the speed on YouTube once the link is up. And if I explain something too quickly, or if you have some clarifying, if you need some clarifying information, excuse me, I'd love to help you out. So let's get going. So the big thing that I think a lot of students usually miss is the intro to the course, right? Whenever you go into a course, you're going to see right away some kind of intro. Actually, I think what I can do is I can show you guys over here what that looks like. Just bear with me here. Okay, so we'll go down to Econ. Okay. And you'll see your course introduction here. And what it does is it kind of goes through everything and shows you exactly what you need to know about the course, okay? All the things you'll have to learn. Now, yes, this is a lot of stuff, and I do suggest reading it in smaller bites because this can get a little bit overwhelming. But when you go through, you're going to see in every single unit folder, you're going to see an intro assignment, or an intro kind of, I guess, guide that lays out exactly what it is that we're going to be looking for whenever we do grade these assignments for you. I also think what's really important to note too is that this is the kind of material you're going to be expected to operate with too as you go through. Again, sometimes when you click through these, right, we'll go to the first one. It gives you your goals, right? It gives you your vocabulary. And I think that's super important because as long as you have the initial information, right, that you need in order to be successful, you already kind of start knowing what to look for as you start going through material. I teach during the day, and a lot of my freshman students that I teach, they really like having some material before we start. They don't like going in totally blind, so that they at least have something or some way to look through things so that they know exactly what it is that they need. I think sometimes what you see is students will just dive into assignments without looking through all the information. And it shows sometimes based on the answers that I get in the quizzes or the answers that I get in the assignments. And I think it's really important to make sure that we're kind of covering all bases so that you're never surprised when you do go through these things. As always, right, I always like to try to kind of answer why and make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to what we need or what we're asking. Having those goals for each unit really lays out kind of what you're going to be expected to cover at the class. And sometimes this can be something tricky and it can be something that requires a little bit more work. Other times it can be something that might not take you as long and you might understand really quickly. Either way, though, it's important to make sure that you kind of have those goals in mind, because at the end, right, think of each unit as a build up right to the end of the end of the class. And once you get to the end of the class, the idea is you have to put it all together in some way. Other classes, that might be a project. In mine, it tends to be an exam. Also, helping you develop vocabulary is super important, right? When you can start audibly speaking about a topic or a class that you're in, I think that shows me, especially as an educator, that I think that I can tell that you understand it, right? Once I know that you are talking about the material and you are utilizing the vocab that we are giving you, I think it shows me when I go through information and assignments and in grading, it shows me that I think you do understand what's going on. I think you do understand what it is that is expected, and I think you're putting yourself in the best spot to make sure that you're successful as well. The quizzes. So what I see a lot of times on quizzes is sometimes the answers appear very rushed. Sometimes the answers might not be fleshed out completely or things like that. But I'm always surprised that when I see quizzes that aren't completed or have half completed answers, because the quizzes offer such an interesting opportunity for you as a student, right? Being able to look through and see questions before you get to the exam. That's a really, really big, what's the word I'm trying to think of? Uh-oh, my brain shut off there. The idea is, though, once you can see these quiz questions before you take the test, they're basically like prerequisites, preloads, right? Making sure that you know the verbiage that you might see when you get to the test. Sometimes even in some classes that I've been in and have gone through here, even through Graduation Alliance, sometimes we'll see that some of the quiz questions that you have in other quizzes might just be recycled and put right back into your exam. Now, that's not always the case, but it is kind of a good idea. You can probably expect to see, right? You can probably expect to see some of these types of questions that you might have been asked before. So making sure that you are at least familiar with them. Always look for key vocab that are used in the quiz so that you're not surprised by it later. Also, I remember the word that I was thinking of. It's advantage, right? When you see these test questions before, or the quiz questions before the exam, it gives you a pretty strong advantage before you get to the final. Think of it as like the test before the test. Right? So let's look a little bit at how I grade. Some students, I'll get emails all the time asking about, what is, how do I get a better grade? Or how do I push to make sure that I get this right? Or what is something that I'm missing? Or I don't understand what's being asked of me, things like that. And I think a lot of times what I run into is I try to be as consistent as possible when I'm grading, because I don't want it to seem like I'm favoring certain behaviors over others, or I'm looking for, I guess, if I don't want to feel like students are being set up or not being, I guess, appreciated when it comes to their work if they do put a lot of time in. So what I look for most right away is engagement, right? Engagement. Keep trying, keep giving it a shot, put in a lot of effort, show me information, right? That's details, that's vocab words, that's adding examples, all of these different things that are super important, right? To make sure that you are operating with the vocabulary that's in each unit, right? That shows me every single time I go through it that you actually do know what you're talking about, and it does show me that you've actually retained some of the information. Interacting with the material. Excuse me. Interacting with the material is really sometimes it can be hard to do because if you really truly don't understand something that's going on, you can be a little bit confused. But I think sometimes what's important to note too is when you interact with material that, say, makes you think a little bit more or you react to a little bit more, right? That's still an interaction, right? Even not understanding something to me is still interacting with the material. If you say like, I understand this part, but I don't understand this part, to me, that shows me that you are still attempting to engage and you are attempting to give it a shot. I think it's really important to kind of still try. Um, Effort's huge. Please make sure that you're filling in all the details that are needed. I can't tell you how many times I see students that don't answer enough or don't put enough detail into things that, clearly ask for a little bit more than maybe a couple words or a couple sentences or things like that. So always making sure, right, that you are covering all of those bases to make sure that you are at least showing me that you're giving it a shot. I have a really large pet peeve, and that is don't skip questions. You're throwing away points. Even if you try, I'm obligated to give you something. And when you don't even show any of that effort, that's where it gets a little bit tough. A little motivation here for you too. So as I was saying a little bit earlier, some of the main issues that I always have in my classes are students not finishing questions, right? This might be, maybe putting half of an answer down, not putting all of the required parts of a question. A lot of times too, I'll see students who, if I say something like, explain the two parts of, or explain one of the four, what am I thinking of? Factors of production, right? If I say explain two of the four and they write down one, they've already not done half of the question, right? That kind of stuff gets a little bit frustrating. So I want to make sure that you are at least following all directions, right? If something asks for like a number of details or a number of specific items or things like that, please make sure that you are still filling all of that out, right? Not following directions. Some of the main issues that I see with that is students will try and do something completely, not, I don't want to say off the wall, but they'll answer it in a way that really isn't quite what it is. And that's not a big deal, but a lot of times when I see students that aren't necessarily following the directions, I think it's one of those things where they didn't really try or it feels really rushed. And that kind of leads into my last one. Not trying. Sometimes I'll see students who, if I have a question about, explain how scarcity, is used in economics or how scarcity relates to supply and demand or things like that. Students will just put in, I don't know, and like, yes, I have to go in and I have to read the, I don't know, and I have to give it a 0, and I have to go through all of that. So if you truly don't know, I really suggest reaching out, asking questions and things like that, or at least doing a little bit of quick research on your own, or at least looking through the unit material again to make sure you're all right. Kind of giving up on those questions really, like I said, throws away points. And I think it makes it a little bit hard for me to see and kind of understand where you are as a student. And unfortunately, this one is always the toughest too. Almost always students are so close to actually getting through and they just don't quite make it until the very end, or they might miss it by a few points or something. It gets so frustrating because I know how bad students want to do, but they'll miss one thing here or there and it might throw off their score, and you feel so bad. I often feel so bad for students that miss things by a point or two, and it just could have been maybe reading the directions or following the directions a little bit better, or making sure you answer all parts of a question, or making sure that you're putting that effort in to show me that you're knowing, right? It can be something as simple as that. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of times I run into that student being so close to the end or being so close to passing or being so close to getting an A that, making sure that they're just reviewing work, right? Make sure you look over what you did and see if it is enough. Make sure it is enough to get yourself to that level. So, excuse me. Take a break here. And now we're back. So in the exam study guide folder, right, you're going to see, I'm all open here. So when you scroll down to the final exam folder, you're going to see the final exam study guide. Okay. Now, where this gets a little bit tricky is it contains terms. It's going to contain your main ideas. It's going to contain all of your learning goals from previous, right? Now, when you first look through this, you're going to see a lot of things. Yes, it is a lot of things. However, if you go back through units, right? You look at intros, right? Looking at currency, domestic goods, globalization. We'll look at unit 8, and we'll go down here to the study guide again and see if we see some things that have been covered, right? Global economy, interdependence, right? Currencies and a few other questions through here as well. And what I want you to think about, saving money, right? All of these things. What I want you to think about, though, is the idea behind a study guide at the final exam level is that you guys have already seen either these vocab terms, these questions. You might have already seen these main ideas and things like that. And now basically what we're asking you to do at this level is just put them all together and operate, right? Now, what I would always suggest doing before you get to the study or the final exam, look over the unit intros again. Always peek through them. Just make sure you understand the main ideas. Sometimes that you can kind of make sure that you're on the same page with something. If you look through the exam study guide and see something you don't know, that's your cue to go back and look through those questions again and maybe make sure that you understood everything. Or if you look through maybe feedback that I've given you from the grade book, you might see things that you didn't quite see before. But also just kind of making sure that you're covering all of those bases when it comes to you actually as a student and making sure that you understand the main ideas, because it is on you to make sure that you show me that you do understand kind of what's being asked of you as you do take the test. Okay. Like I said, always look over the units one more time. This is one of my favorite movies, Miracle. We're gonna make some skate back and forth again. So a little bit of a test setup. If this is the only course that you've taken with me, perhaps, or in any other course that's in the social studies realm, a lot of our tests tend to be set up the exact same way. We do have a numerous type of questions. This might range from multiple choice, right? True and false questions, short answer questions. But the short answer questions are huge because you need to make sure that you fulfill all the requirements, right? On my end, whenever you get to a short answer question, I have a rubric that I go through and I make sure that you're covering all parts of something. So if a question asks you to, describe or identify and describe 4 or 5 different things, you need to make sure that you have 4 or 5 different things and all of those are in your answer. And the second you don't have those, you've lost a little bit of credit, right? That's the one thing that I look for is I make sure before all else that you've at least tried to label the right number of things. And if those aren't even there, then I can't give you full credit for the question right from the get-go. And it's kind of tough when I'm grading at that point because I have to make sure that I'm still giving you a fair shake, but you're already kind of behind on that. So if all else fails and you still don't know the answer, at least make sure you're trying to put the exact number in that's being asked, or at least trying to come up with as many ideas as you can, just so I know kind of what it is that you're talking about or what you need kind of clarifying on. So I want to give you 10 potential questions or types that you might see on your exam. You can ask questions at any time. If you are watching this as a review a little bit later, make sure you can pause the video or screenshot at any time if you want so you can check them out. I think it'll be really helpful, especially if you log in and get to see this today. So some definitions. Some of the big ones you're going to want to make sure that you look at scarcity, right? Scarcity is relevant to economics because it's not quite, a lot of times students will think of it as like supply and demand, but that's not quite totally what it is. A lot of times it's mainly just saying something is in short supply, right? So if we'll say a market is experiencing a scarcity in tires, right? So like rubber and tires might be scarce because it's in short supply. There's not a lot of supply to go around. So a lot more people need it, but they're unable to get it because the supply is so low. Macroeconomics, Macroeconomics and microeconomics tend to have the same idea when it comes to what they study, obviously, with economics. But the big key between these two words is macro and micro. Okay. Macro means large or large scale. So when you look at macro, you might assume that, or you can assume that you're going to be looking at global interactions, right? Uh, Economics of large places, economics of large countries, economics of the planet, right? Economics between other places. Microeconomics might relate a little bit differently, right? Micro means small. And so when you hear or see the term microeconomics, you can assume that it's going to be something a little bit smaller than global. So it might be state level, right? Or it could be even inside state level. You could be looking at, I don't know, you might be looking at local government, right? So I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan. So maybe you could look at microeconomics of, things that are occurring in Grand Rapids, right? City level economics, right? That would be your more microeconomic view. The factors of production. This one is something that usually I've always noticed has tripped students up a little bit, and that's okay because I mean it trips me up too. And I mean I had to study this stuff quite a bit when I was in college, but the big things that it covers is there are four of them, right? Land, labor, enterprise, and capital. Okay. When you look at land, this is pretty obvious, right? The natural resources that's need for a company or an economic or a company, sorry, an economy, right? So when I say something like, a company is starting a place, right? They need property, okay? When you look at labor, right? That's going to be your human input or your workers, right? Your capital is like the things that you use to build or make or produce your product, right? So say that you make railroad ties or you make railroads or you build railroads across the United States, right? You need all of those supplies that are necessary in order to create a railroad, and you want to make sure that you are providing enough of it. You are providing, you know, adequate material to make sure that you have a successful product. um, and then enterprise, that's your, a lot of times enterprise is your kind of like your business method or like what you're going to do to kind of make sure that you are successful, right? This one tends to get a little bit tricky for students because enterprise and entrepreneurship can be kind of used interchangeably. And I think a lot of times what I see is students kind of getting confused or tripped up on that enterprise part or the entrepreneurship part, right? Think of it as like the business owner or a owned business that's in there. Supply and demand. Supply, obviously, the amount of something or the amount of there is of a good, and then demand is how much that good is wanted or requested, right? Hey, how's it going? I am actually just covering, you got to the good part, actually. I'm covering some of our exam questions that we're going to have on the economics exam. Mm. Oh, all right. Some of the questions you might have might be related to application questions. This might be a little bit helpful for you if you are looking, this is going to be your more multiple choice question. So if you're looking for that, you're going to see something like this. So one of these questions here that I found is the White House a part of the public sector or a private sector? And I think this is when you have to start looking at the key terms in this question, right? Things like public sector, things like private sector. Private sector is referring to your private business owners, right, that aren't related to the government. Your public sector might be your open government businesses and things like that, that are able to kind of be utilized and seen and visible to the public and transparent. This is usually a really good question because then you have to look at the White House, right? Is the White House a private enterprise or is the White House a public enterprise, right? And being the face of our government, you can assume that the White House would be a public sector area, right? Because it does encompass that kind of public view. Some concepts that you're always going to have to look at. The Federal Reserve, right? The Federal Reserve is an interesting one because everyone kind of sees it as like the big bank, right? It's similar to like the same style or same level as the Treasury, but the Federal Reserve is kind of like the bank to rule them all, right? It's a large bank system that makes sure that all other bank systems are doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're not overstepping. They're not ripping off constituents or customers or people that are supporting them. They're not stealing money. They're not you're using malpractice or any of these things. The Federal Reserve, though, is kind of this massive banking body, I think, that kind of can confuse you if you don't have a little bit of background, but kind of what it does is it keeps banks accountable, right? It shows and makes sure that everyone is kind of utilizing banks appropriately, and that the bank owners and the bankers are using the banks appropriately when they are helping their customers. Monopolies can be a good thing, but generally they're kind of considered a bad thing. Monopoly is when you have complete control over a market. So, for example, right now I teach U.S. history during the day, and I am teaching about oil, Standard Oil, back in the late 1800s, like the industrialization age, right? John Rockefeller has this massive oil company, and what he does is he buys out all other oil fields and all other oil companies so that he is the only one. And by not having any, or by having all of the oil companies that are in existence, right, he has a complete monopoly over the oil market. He controls it all. Now, the question for this is, do they help or hurt? Consider what makes markets work well, right? That idea of competition, that idea of being able to go against somebody and beating someone out for profit and things like that, and that kind of like that spirit of competition and business owning. When there's no competition, right, markets aren't going to grow, and the people who are in charge of these markets, right, can charge whatever price they want because you're not going to be able to buy it from anyone else. And so I would consider monopolies relatively a negative in our society, because I think a lot of times they create more problems than what they're worth. This is your bread and butter question. There's about 5 of these on the exam, and they ask questions ranging from factors of production, making sure that you understand kind of what's being asked of you with the Federal Reserve. This is a good one too, right? What are 2 ways the government protects us from harmful products and work conditions? So this requires you to understand and know a little bit more about your rights as workers, and your rights in a workplace, right? When you are working for somebody who is, say, I guess, a public business that is monitored or at least checked on routinely by government agencies. The big thing about this one is following the directions completely, though. Give 2 ways. Make sure you write in complete sentences. That's always a bugaboo of mine, but it's not a big deal. Here's a good answer for you. The government protects us from harmful products and work conditions by regulating the economy and by passing laws that regulate what can be sold legally, passing laws that regulate workplace conditions, right? If you guys have heard of OSHA or other companies that monitor safety regulations in businesses, right? You'll note that all of those are helpful in kind of protecting you as the worker when it comes to working in places and making sure you're not having to handle things that might be unsafe or might be a little bit detrimental to you as a worker, as a human, right? It's a wordy answer, but when I see an answer like this, my first instinct is to give that full credit, because it covers 2 ways. It talks a little bit about how the government does protect people from kind of being in danger and having those issues at work. And it's a well thought out sentence, right? It explains exactly what it is that I'm asking. There's no extra fluff. There's no extra wordage in there that might be confusing, and it does a really good job. And like I said, wordy, I know. Other questions you might be facing, some other multiple choice here. Dollar value of all the goods and services produced by a country and measured each year is called the what? Your answers are gross domestic product, microeconomy, market, and scarcity. Now, when you get to questions like this, I think it's really important to look at kind of what the question's asking versus the kind of answers you're getting. So we talked about scarcity. Scarcity means that a product is running out, right? So when you look at this question, it's asking about the dollar value of all the goods and services produced by a country. That's not going to really help you because it's not talking about how little a product there is. Right? It's talking about the dollar value. The market, this is a potential one because, right, the idea is that the market is asked or is being defined by kind of how economics interact with each other, their output, their input, types of businesses and things like that. But the big thing to note too is that market is a pretty broad answer. Microeconomy, we talked about this, small economy. This is saying all by a country. So you know that micro is probably not going to really work in here because it's talking about a full country. Now, if this is at a state, you might have a little bit of an argument, but with this one, I would say probably not. So you're between already A and C, gross domestic product, right? Gross domestic product, once you look through your material, you'll remember that it was actually that, right? Gross domestic product is kind of like a value that is summed up on all these things that are kind of going on, all the money that's going into into goods and services versus how much is being sold, et cetera, right? And it kind of is a measure of a country to see how successful they are. The market is a little bit too, like I said, wide open for this, so it makes it a little bit tough. So you guessed it. Your answer is GDP. Like I said, make sure you're considering all the options. I'm very much the type that goes through each one and says, no, this doesn't make sense. Oh, this makes sense. Okay, this doesn't make sense. It helps me just to kind of organize my thoughts a little bit, and it helps me to make sure that I'm kind of covering everything that I'm supposed to so that no one's, so that I don't know. I just don't like missing details on questions, and I feel better when I go through every possible avenue to make sure I have the right one. So at this point, I think we're going to wrap up here. Like I said, remember to always go back and look through the units and the unit guides, or look over the study guide. The vocab is huge, right? The vocab contains all words that you're going to see in some way, either used on a question, used as an answer on the test, right? So you're going to see all this vocab again in one big assignment. So I kind of want to make sure that you're all understanding the severity of rereading and looking through that kind of stuff again. So those are my two big tips, though. That study guide and that vocab is very key to success. So you're going to do great, and I hope you guys have a great day. If you guys have any questions for me, shoot me an email. As always, I love to kind of recap and make sure that I'm making sense to everybody. And if anyone has any questions about the test or the course, shoot me an email, and I will see you guys later.